The bus looked like a rusted whale stranded in a sea of pale grass. Its windows were stitched with rough silicone seams, the roof dripping at predictable spots, like grumpy metronomes, and the smell was a mix of iron, damp cloth, and dog. Ahead, the mountain unfolded in dark green steps, threaded with strands of fog. The wind slowly pushed down the valley. Miguel's first dawn inside that old hunk of metal arrived with a bird pecking stubbornly at the rubber seal of a window, and the muffled bark of Echo, the German shepherd who always slept with one ear tuned to the world. Echo lifted his head, his split heterochromia catching the pale sunlight, one eye brown, the other rimmed with a lighter amber hue, as if it carried a permanent piece of sunset. A comma-shaped scar on his muzzle, legacy of some old fight before Miguel rescued him from the unit's kennel, seemed to underline everything the dog sniffed. "Easy, partner," Miguel said in a low voice, carrying both exhaustion and care. "Today, we begin." Begin meant turning the bus, parked in a forgotten patch at the end of a gravel road, into something more than a temporary shelter. It was the closest thing to a home Miguel had felt in months. After losing his rented apartment, his toolboxes, the furniture inherited from his mother, and the last scrap of dignity that had kept people's stares less cutting, the fall had come in layers. First the night watch job that let him go for budget cuts, then the debts, then his mother's death, then the failed attempt to sell the only lot his grandfather had promised him, not properly registered, according to a land-hungry local businessman. Before he knew it, Miguel was sleeping in the back seat of an old VW hatchback. Echo curled on the floor, waking at the slightest sound. He rose, his spine answering with the familiar sting from a jump gone wrong back in training in Manaus. He washed his face with cold water from a bottle, tied back his short hair, and lit the makeshift stove. A rocket burner built from metal pipes and fire bricks, something he'd learned from a resourceful sergeant. Echo watched, chin on paw, following the ritual. Everything Miguel did carried an economy of movement, as if war had rewritten his body's grammar. Execute, check, conserve, anticipate. Stay. The command came automatic, and Echo obeyed, shifting only his eyes. Good boy. As the water began to bubble, Miguel opened a spiral notebook where he'd sketched, the night before, his plan for taming the metallic beast. Where to cut the rotten floor, where to build a bed, where to fasten shelves, where the rain seeped in, where the water drained out. He had measured the bus, like a man measuring a threat. Now it was a promise. The land, at the foot of a small ridge, lay beside an abandoned quarry. His grandfather, who'd worked stone all his life, swore that this patch of earth carried a hidden stream beneath it, a cold vein feeding the region's creeks. As a teenager, Miguel had once asked why he didn't just sell the lot and solve life's troubles. The old man, with his usual crooked smile, had replied, "Water is what no one sees but everyone needs. When the time comes, you'll remember." Echo sniffed at the bus door, restless, tail swinging in a cautious half-moon, the signal that something new and interesting was within reach. "Search?" Miguel raised an eyebrow. The dog descended the creaking steps, sniffed along the sides of the vehicle, poked at the weeds, then looked back, asking silent permission to go further. Miguel stepped outside with his tin cup of coffee. The dawn chill bit his skin. The air smelled of ancient damp earth, not from rain, but from moisture living deep underground. Echo's nose led him to the right side, where the bus's body, rotted near the wheel wells, formed a small hollow. He stuck his muzzle in, inhaled deeply, pulled back, then returned with more focus, as if finding an invisible corridor. His left ear stayed upright, the right tilted. Slightly, the mark posture Miguel remembered from their old search exercises. "Mark," Miguel confirmed, as if acknowledging a soldier. The dog, pleased, scraped gently at the dirt near the wheel. A muffled, hollow thunk answered back, promising. "Oh, don't tell me." Miguel crouched, pressed his ear to the sparse grass, knocked with his knuckles. The same thunk, metallic. He fetched a crowbar from the toolbox, pulled aside weeds, pried open the rusted bolts that held a metal sheet. With a reluctant groan, the bus yielded, revealing a space between its floor and the earth. Echo tried to shove his nose in, but Miguel held him back. "Stay, Echo. If there's an animal or something sharp." He ducked in with his headlamp, sweeping the beam like a man brushing away memories. The light caught dust, webs, and then a metal tube, about 16 inches long, the kind used to carry documents, wired with rusted iron to the chassis. Miguel's heart began to race like seconds before stepping into an unknown street on patrol. Miguel's breathing changed register, his face warming. Assessment, planning, execution, he reminded himself. His hand, steadier than his chest, unwound the rusty wire and twisted the tube free. Echo gave a short, impatient whine. The tube came loose, heavy in Miguel's grip, as if it had carried weight across decades. Inside, pressed against the metal wall, came the dry smell of paper, leather and iron. He opened it carefully, brushed aside a stream of ants, and pulled out the contents. A cracked leather wallet with the initials AGN, a bundle of yellowed papers, and a keychain with a single long key, the kind that belonged to doors that no longer existed. "Agenor Gomez Nunez," he read, and the memory hit with the simple force of Sunday afternoons at his grandfather's house, the radio buzzing with soccer games, the rough hand teaching him to tie knots. Grandpa. The wallet held old documents, photos of a young man beside a gleaming bus, the same model. Maybe even the same vehicle when it was still the future. At the bottom was a penciled note: "If the bus stalls, the water pushes." The papers showed sketches and calculations, firm handwriting mapping out the land with words like waterfall, escape channel, powerhouse. Terms Miguel knew not from textbooks but from late-night curiosity, binging videos about small-scale hydroelectric systems, desperate for alternatives banks never offered. There was also a map of the lot, stamped in 1954, with the notary's seal. Tucked into an old envelope was a copy of a deed stating the property couldn't be sold for 25 years after the death of one Odette Nunez, Miguel's grandmother, who had passed in 1999, which meant the restriction had expired only recently in 2024. "So that's why they want this land so badly," he muttered, blood heating with a bittersweet fire. This wasn't just paper. It was a voice of family carried across decades, demanding to be heard in the present. He came back to himself when Echo nudged his arm with a cold nose. The dog tilted his head, reading Miguel's mood. Miguel smiled briefly and scratched behind his ears. "Good work, Sergeant." He'd never called Echo that before, but in that moment, the rank felt earned. "Let's see what this key opens." The key begged for an old lock, and the property had no shortage of relics. About 50 yards from the bus stood a barn swallowed in vines. Miguel had avoided it for 2 days, wary of nests or collapsing beams. Now curiosity, fueled by the map, pushed him forward. "Heel," he ordered. Echo came in perfect step, body aligned with Miguel's leg, as if they were once again under an instructor's clipboard. The barn door gave way on the third shove, wood swollen but stubborn. Inside smelled of old oil and grease, but the roof was surprisingly solid. Tools hung like silent skeletons from nails. At the far end, beneath a dark tarp, something bulky waited. Miguel pulled it free, releasing a storm of dust. Underneath lay a dismantled water wheel, metal blades marked with chalk numbers, a crate of copper coils wrapped in cloth. "Grandpa, you sly fox." Miguel laughed aloud, as if the old man could hear from just beyond a thin wall. A locked cabinet stood beside it. The long key scraped, turned, and with a clack that echoed in Miguel's chest, the padlock yielded. Inside were more papers, ledgers, quarry receipts, and a manual for building a homemade Pelton turbine, annotated in the margins, minimum, head calculation, flow rate, nozzle diameter. In one notebook, Agenor described the underground spring 20 paces north of the Whale. In winter it trickles, in summer it sings. The water hides in the dark, but we call it with a channel. In another, this wheel makes light. Light is freedom, what others call improvisation. I call a new beginning. Miguel's throat tightened. He had seen light in other forms, flares signaling curfew, tracer fire cutting wrong lines across the sky in Haiti, a flashlight slicing through school rubble after an earthquake while he carried a silent girl to safety. Back then, he thought he'd never see a sunrise without noise. Now, the idea of making light from singing water felt almost like a modest miracle, the kind that doesn't make headlines, but changes a life. Then came the growl of an engine on the gravel road. His chest locked. Iko's ears shot up, body tense toward the door. Miguel killed his headlamp, bolted the lock from inside, and moved to the small window. He'd seen it before. City trucks or strange pickups checking illegal occupations. Even when he visited the land with his mother, men in pressed shirts and polished boots had come with clipboards, measuring what wasn't theirs. But this time, it wasn't a government truck. It was an old motorcycle and a peeling white van. The van door groaned open, and out stepped a woman with her hair in a low bun, simple clothes, hands that knew a hoe. She waved like greeting a neighbor. "Morning, neighbor," she called, voice firm and cordial. Iko dipped his head, letting out a short, warning bark, firm, but not aggressive. Miguel opened the barn door cautiously. The woman smiled with the ease of someone who had made friends at first sight all her life, no matter the hardships. "Didn't mean to startle you, sir. Name's Zuleika. I live around the bend, that wooden house. Saw smoke at dawn, smelled coffee, thought someone knew. Around here, no one arrives without the wind carrying." "The news, Miguel," he said, tipping the brim of his cap with a reflex left over from the army. "This is Iko. Beautiful animal. Shepherd, right? Look at those different eyes." She crouched slightly, offering the back of her hand without intrusion. Iko accepted the diplomacy, touching her hand with his nose, tail swinging in a contained circle. "I came to see if you need anything. That shack's got termites in the corners, but it'll hold. And," she lowered her voice, "I've heard city officials have been jotting down license plates of folks staying out here. If they approach you, don't say a word alone. Some of those gentlemen play at being inspectors when they smell inheritance." Her warning carried the same ease as small talk about the weather. Miguel bit back a defensive reply. He trusted no one yet. War had taught him trust burns slow, like matches in a blackout, but he also knew sincerity when he saw it. "Thank you, Mrs. Zuleika." "Mrs. is my mother-in-law. May she rest in peace. Just call me Zuleika." She smiled. "If you want good water, there's a spring after the curve. Thin but sweet. This afternoon I'll bring some basil seedlings. A man who makes coffee on a camp stove deserves some seasoning." When she left, Miguel watched the road swallow the van. The silence that returned carried a little less suspicion. Iko lay down, but without turning fully on his side, resting in alert mode, what the platoon called sleeping outside. The morning slipped back into work. Miguel stripped away panels from the bus's body to make air vents, swept the floor, and laid down a patchwork of wooden pallets he'd scavenged for free at a supply yard. Iko patrolled in steady circuits between the bus and the barn, as if guarding their fragile luck. From time to time, Miguel tested commands. Down, sit, drop. The dog obeyed instantly, a living reminder that some things in the world still made sense when spoken out loud. That comfort almost felt like faith. By noon, the heat pressed even into the shadows. Miguel ate rice with a fried egg and a bruised tomato with salt, sipping water in careful, measured gulps. Then, map in hand and shovel over his shoulder, he followed his grandfather's notes. 20 paces north of the whale, look for ground that sinks when dry and rises when wet. The steps took him into a patch of tall grass scattered with stones. Iko circled ahead, his search tightening into smaller loops until he stopped at a damp patch of soil, his nose pulsing with short bursts of air. He looked at Miguel and gave a sharp bark. "Here!" Miguel sank the shovel. The earth gave way easily for the first few inches, then grew denser below. A musty smell of old water rose with it, stirring bitter-sweet memories. His grandfather sitting by the creek, sharpening a knife, telling stories of when the bus was still running. hauling workers, dreams, children who never got sick on the ride. The blade struck wood. Clearing the dirt with his hand, Miguel uncovered a lid, maybe from an old trough or chest, fitted with iron rings. He pulled. The cover rose reluctantly, the wood groaning at the sudden light after so many years. Cool air breathed out. Beneath lay a shallow well, its walls neatly stacked with stones. At the bottom, a thin current seeped from the rock, stubborn and steady. The famous spring. "You weren't lying, Grandpa," Miguel whispered, his eyes stinging, unsure if from soil, sunlight, or the words he had finally spoken. Eco lowered. His head lapped twice, then lifted his gaze as if asking, "Now what?" Now, Miguel knew, it was time to build what had been drawn decades earlier. A small channel, a wheel, a simple turbine, a promise of light. Numbers rattled in his head. Pressure loss, energy conversion, how many watts it would take to power bulbs, a small fridge, maybe a tool. None of it came from a diploma, but from sleepless nights of stubborn learning. And that, he realized, was enough. A song of water and a plan. The rumble of a pickup truck cut through his calculations. It wasn't Zuleika's van. This engine was stronger, too confident for locals and too hurried for visitors. Eco stood, hackles raised, body leaning forward. Miguel didn't need to speak. The dog fell into place at his left, muzzle pointed toward the road. The truck stopped by the barbed wire fence marking the edge of the property. 3 men got out. 2 of them struck the same pose, hands hooked at their belts as if wearing invisible badges. The third, thinner, carried a leather folder stamped with golden seals. One of them jerked his chin toward the bus. "Good afternoon," he called, already walking forward like the land bowed to his shoes. Miguel's body instinctively searched for cover, though this wasn't war, only men with sharp words. He drew a slow breath, squared his shoulders, and motioned Eco a step back. The dog obeyed, waiting. "Good afternoon," Miguel answered, neutral. "You're standing on public interest land," the man with the folder announced, flashing a smile that never touched his eyes. "I represent Mr. Otacilio Brandon's office. We're regularizing the deeds of these lots for a project of—" He flipped the folder, theatrically. "Sustainable tourist development. Seems you've been misinformed. This area cannot be occupied." Miguel caught the tactic. Speak fast, throw in acronyms, and hope people surrender to the other man's pace. But he wasn't people. His grandfather's notebooks, firm handwriting full of stubborn notes, seemed to whisper, "We've seen times like these before. They just come back in new clothes." "I have documents," Miguel said, steadying his tone, "and I occupy this land peacefully. If you want to talk, tomorrow, at the registry office." "No need for paperwork to have a conversation," the man replied, stepping too close, using his body as pressure. "And that big dog of yours, no muzzle. Accidents happen. Better for you to cooperate." Eco didn't growl. He wasn't trained to posture, but his weight shifted almost imperceptibly, ready to move. Miguel rested his hand on the dog's back, a signal of calm. "Tomorrow, at the office," he repeated. "Not today. This is my home." One of the polished bootmen whispered to his partner. The man with the folder inhaled, forcing his smile back on. "We'll return with the proper papers." When the truck finally rolled away, Miguel realized he was dripping cold sweat. His whole body had reacted as if someone had armed a grenade and laid it gently at his feet. It took a while before he could stoke the fire of calm again. Eco pressed his nose against Miguel's hand, as always when his master's breathing went too shallow. Miguel led him back into the bus, sat down, and closed his eyes. The same hated reel unspooled in his head, the ground shaking chalk dust, the lieutenant's order, clear the entrance, the girl with the striped blanket and wide eyes he had carried, while others dug through rubble, sirens screeching like nails in his skull. He did. The exercise the army psychologist had taught him years later. Name 5 things you can see, 4 you can touch, 3 you can hear, 2 you can smell, 1 you can taste. He saw sunlight cutting through a cracked window, felt the rough wood of the bench, heard the call of a thrush, smelled grease mixed with damp earth, tasted the last sip of coffee. The world shrank back into something tolerable. "We'll need allies, partner," he murmured to Eco, more to himself. "And we'll need light." That afternoon, Zuleika returned with seedlings and a loaf of still warm bread. She also carried a crumpled note. "Word's already out in town about the Brando truck stopping here," she explained, as if commenting on a soap opera. "That man knows no limits. If you go to the registry, talk to Dr. Norberto. He won't sell out. And," her eyes flicked toward the bus, "if you're planning something big, call me. I've got a nephew who's good with electricity. Likes to tinker but safe tinkering." Miguel was not a man who accepted help easily. Since leaving the army, his broken pride showed up either as anger or silence. But the warm bread, the scent of fresh basil, and the way Zuleika said something big, like naming destiny, loosened him. "I'll call, yes, thank you." When night settled against the ridge and the cold bit deeper, Miguel lit a candle, spread Agenor's map across the makeshift table, and redrew the plan. Clear the Springs Channel the next day, set up a PVC gutter salvaged from scraps, mount the improvised wheel, hook it to a small homemade turbine with copper coils and an old car alternator. No miracles, just work, calculation, mistakes, and corrections. A flicker of future was enough. Eco tapped his knee lightly, ears tilted toward the barn. A different noise, not animal, not wind. Miguel grabbed his lantern and the iron bar that served as a table leg. He moved along the bus's side, steps silent, lantern off, eyes adjusting to the dark. Eco followed, a disciplined shadow. The E2 barn door stood ajar. Miguel was sure he had locked it. The iron bar weighed differently in his hand. Old memories made his body lighter. He snapped on the lantern. Nothing. The beam swept across a shelf, then froze. On the ground, at the base of the cabinet where he had stored the notebooks, a puddle of water reflected the light. More than a puddle, a trail. The back wall against the hillside had a dark wooden square he hadn't noticed in daylight. A thin line of water leaked beneath it. "Eco!" "Mark." The dog sniffed, glanced at Miguel, and tapped the wood with his paw. The same hollow sound as before. Miguel felt along the edges, found a simple latch, turned it. The wood gave way, revealing a hidden hatch. Cold, damp air rose from within. He aimed the beam down a stone stairwell. Eco leaned forward but waited for the command. Miguel descended the first steps, the temperature dropping, the smell of wet rock filling his lungs. At the end stretched a narrow corridor propped with old beams. The sound of water whispered steady, as if the mountain itself breathed through cracks. At the far end, a small stone chamber, low ceiling, a crude workbench. On it, a wooden chest with heavy hinges. A rusted padlock slept there. The long key fit, turned, and with a second clack that day, something more than metal opened. Inside, wrapped in burlap, were numbered metal parts, nozzles of varying diameters, and manuals bound in blue. Field guide, low head, micro hydroelectric plant. Among the cloths, a thick envelope, stamped and addressed to Agenor, never opened. Miguel tore it carefully. Out slipped a letter from the old National Department of Water and Power, dated 1979, authorizing a technical study of the spring for microgeneration. Another from 2001 warned of regulatory changes, never collected, and a smaller folder from the local notary, typed papers, signatures in ink of another era. On top lay an updated deed, correcting the lot's boundaries, granting water rights to Miguel Nunes. Official seal, notarized signatures, and a trembling handwritten note from Agenor himself. "Miguel, if life gets hard, open here. The water turns the wheel makes light, and light brings people, and people bring life." Miguel's throat closed. He pressed his hand to the cold stone wall and breathed deeply. Eco, sensing the weight of the moment, rested his head against Miguel's knee. The dog trembled slightly, part chill, part borrowed emotion. Dogs, Miguel knew, sometimes lend their bodies to carry their master's feelings. "We'll build it, Eco." Miguel whispered, voice heavy with promise. "We'll make this old whale swim again." From outside came the crunch of tires on gravel. More than one engine this time. Headlights sliced the barn through gaps in the wood, cutting the dark into strips, muffled voices, hurried steps. A lantern's beam danced beneath the door. "Someone's in there!" A man's voice barked, low and impatient. Miguel swallowed, switched off. His headlamp slid the hatch shut and worked the latch until it clicked. Steps drew closer, wood creaking, hands on the windows. His heart ticked seconds like an old combat stopwatch. He pressed his forehead to the cold stone and whispered for Eco alone. "Light comes first, the rest we'll handle." Above them, the barn door burst open, spilling a rectangle of light across the floor. A lantern beam swept the room, brushed the chest, ricocheted off the hatch, still looking like old, ordinary wood. Miguel counted steps, 1, 2, 3, paper rustling. A man coughed, another muttered about crazy old notebooks. The beam lingered, sniffing with eyes, then moved away. "What's that outside?" "Looks like a well," another voice called. The steps retreated, rushed toward the night. Darkness reclaimed the chamber, only the whisper of water remained. Miguel shut his eyes, feeling fear and exhilaration not together. Above, strangers circled what he had just found. Below, an invisible wheel was already turning. Dawn came after a night of broken sleep, every creak of the bus and whistle of wind sounding like boots approaching. At first light, Miguel was already up, dressed in worn camo pants, a weathered jacket, and scuffed boots. An improvised uniform. Not army anymore, but his body still obeyed like it was. He brewed coffee on the rocket stove, shared bread with Eco, the dog chewing slowly, as if knowing every meal was also a pact. "Today, partner, we make some noise," Miguel said, flipping through Agenor's sketches. "If they want to scare us, we'll answer with light." All morning he worked in the barn, sorting metal blades, copper coils, and the small homemade turbine described in the old manuals. Agenor's notes were meticulous, almost as if he knew his grandson would one day need to follow them. Zuleika arrived with her nephew Pedro, a wiry 20-year-old, buzzing with restless energy. Pedro eyed Eco with awe. "He understands everything you say?" "More than most." "People," Miguel replied. Eco confirmed by resting his head on Pedro's knee. "He was trained with me in the battalion. We don't need words." Pedro grinned, charmed, and helped sand the blades. The scrape of metal, the smell of old grease, and the smoke of the stove created an improvised symphony. Each piece fitted into place felt like Miguel was reassembling broken pieces of himself. By afternoon, they hauled the wheel to the spring. Muscles strained, silences mixed with effort. Zuleika directed. Pedro laughed. Eco tugged a rope tied to the frame with eager strength. At the well, Miguel set up a gutter to channel water onto the blades. When he released the flow, the current began to spin the wheel, slowly at first, then steady, like an iron heart pumping life. "She's alive!" Pedro shouted, eyes blazing. "We did it!" Miguel fitted the car alternator to the turbine, linked the makeshift cables. A spark, a crackle, and then the bulb hanging from a wire, lit with a warm yellow glow. Not much, but enough to pull discreet tears from Miguel's eyes. Eco barked, circling in joy, tail a blur. "See that, Grandpa?" Miguel murmured, touching Agenor's map in his pocket. "You're still guiding this wheel." News of the light spread quickly across the ridge. Zuleika, proud, mentioned it at the village store, and soon curious neighbors came to see the singing wheel. But with curiosity came poison. The next day, a black pickup reappeared on the road. 3 men stepped out, this time with a 4th. Older, neatly pressed suit, hair combed with practiced vanity. Otacílio Brandão. He walked up to the fence, gripping the barbed wire as if it already belonged to him. "Nice toy, soldier," he sneered. "But this isn't a place for circuses. This land has an owner." Miguel drew a deep breath. Eco's presence at his side gave him the anchor he needed. "It does have an owner. Me." He held up the deed from the chest. Legitimate, notarized. Otacílio's smile was hollow, soulless. "Old papers mean nothing against influence. I can have this bus towed by tomorrow if I wish." He narrowed his eyes. "But maybe we can negotiate. You leave quietly, I pay you a bit, and everyone's happy." "I don't sell," Miguel snapped, words sharp as orders in the field. "This is family land, my new beginning." Echo barked, deep and resonant, the sound echoing off the ridge. Otacilio flinched half a step back, masking it poorly. He glanced at his men, signaled, and the truck sped off in a cloud of dust. Miguel knew the war was only starting. 3 days later, the wheel spun steadily, powering lamps and charging a small battery. That night, the attack came. The mountain was swallowed in fog. Eco sensed it first. Low growl before any sound. Miguel rose silently, grabbed his lantern, stepped out. A shadow darted near the wheel. Another followed, carrying a can of fuel. Miguel shouted, but before he could reach them, Eco lunged. The shepherd struck like lightning, toppling the man with the gas can. The reek of gasoline spread through the air. The other tried to cut the rope that held the wheel, but stumbled back when Miguel charged with the iron bar, voice booming, "Drop it! Now!" The men bolted into the darkness, leaving muddy tracks. Eco returned, panting, carrying something in his jaws, a baseball cap. Miguel took it, flipped it, and saw the initials stitched on the brim. J.B. João Brandão, he muttered. The old man's son. This wasn't just proof. It was a warning. The Brando family would stop at nothing to destroy what he was building. The next morning, Miguel walked to the village with Zuleika. He carried the cap, the documents, and the story of the sabotage straight to the registry office. There he met Dr. Norberto, the notary Zuleika had recommended, a man with thick glasses and a calm voice. He studied every paper, every signature. "Your grandfather was careful," Norberto said, closing the folder firmly. "These documents are valid. If the Brandos try anything, they'll have to answer before the law. But," he peered over his glasses, "don't be surprised if they try force first." On the way back, Miguel was no longer alone. Pedro appeared at the bus with a backpack full of tools and a wide grin. "I want to help. I won't let them take this from you." He clapped Miguel's shoulder like sealing a pact. "Here, we build. We don't destroy." Miguel looked at the young man, at Eco stretched on the floor, at his grandfather's papers spread on the table. For the first time in years, something that felt like real hope stirred in his chest. The rusted bus was becoming more than a shelter. It was turning into a stronghold, a workshop for the future. But the ridge woke up uneasy. The birds were silent, the air heavy. Miguel, trained to read what the environment didn't say, sensed it before Echo stood bristling. The dog growled low, as if the mountain itself had warned, "Something will break today." By 8 o'clock, the black pickup returned. This time, it wasn't alone. 2 more trucks followed, and behind them, a backhoe. The convoy stopped by the fence. Men in boots stepped down, some with machetes, others with clipboards. A theater of public works, masking intimidation. At the center, Otacilio Brandão, suit immaculate despite the dust. Beside him, his son João, wearing a brand new cap to replace the one Eco had ripped away. "No more games, soldier!" Otacilio shouted, loud enough for all to hear. "This land is of collective interest. We'll tear down this scrap, heap and make room for what really matters." Miguel gripped the iron bar but stayed calm. Echo waited for the command. Behind them, Zuleika and Pedro stood tall, faces steady. Pedro held up a small camera phone, ready to record. "What matters is family, memory and justice," Miguel replied, raising his grandfather's papers. "The deed is legitimate. You have no right here." Otacilio stepped forward, false smile glued on. "I have power, and power beats paper." Echo barked, a thunderous sound that echoed across the hillside, making several men recoil instinctively. Miguel's voice came strong. "Power is what we build together. All you know is how to destroy." The tension thickened. The water wheel's steady hum seemed to remind everyone something greater was at work. Light flickered inside the bus, powered by Agenor's dream, decades old, as if proving he was still there. Pedro lifted the camera higher. It's recording, Mr. Miguel. If they touch anything, the whole country will see. Otacilio's mask cracked. No one cares about a rusty bus and a washed-up soldier, he spat. And when that recording disappears, no one will remember. Before Miguel could respond, Echo advanced a step, gaze locked on João. The young man stumbled back, tripping in the loose dirt. His own men laughed at the humiliation. The Brando's authority, built on fear, began to crumble. Then something unexpected happened. From the other side of the road, people began to appear. At first, just a handful. Friends, Zuleika had quietly called. Then dozens. Men, women, children, all curious and outraged by the Brando's arrogance. Some carried phones, others only folded arms and unflinching eyes. The entire village seemed to rise in defense of the rusted bus. "This belongs to Miguel," someone shouted. "To Agenor's grandson," another added. "Let the Brandos find another hill to ruin." The collective weight shifted the balance. The thugs hesitated. The backhoe's engine cut off. Otacilio tried to speak, but his voice drowned in the crowd's murmur. Power built on intimidation withered before the unity of neighbors. But João, furious and reckless, jumped from the truck bed carrying a can of gasoline. He stormed toward the water wheel, splashing fuel into the channel. Eco reacted first. The shepherd bolted like lightning, leaping onto João and knocking the can away. Gasoline spilled across the ground, but far from the water's flow. João fell hard, cursing, trying to rise, only to find himself surrounded by angry neighbors. "Enough!" Miguel roared, voice carrying the weight of command. "You've crossed the line!" That was when the sirens came. Blue lights flared, patrol cars blocking the road. The police had arrived, called earlier by Zuleika, anticipating trouble. From one of the cars stepped Dr. Norberto, the notary, holding certified copies of the deed. He showed them to the officers, who wasted no time. The Brandos were trespassing, Otacilio argued, but the evidence of sabotage, Pedro's recordings, and the collective voice of the community left no room for lies. The Brandos were forced to retreat, escorted by the law, and shamed by their own exposure. In the days that followed, the rusted bus became a symbol. Volunteers came to help. The wheel was reinforced, its power shared with nearby homes. Miguel, once alone and broken, now led a living workshop of new beginnings. The bus turned into a meeting hall. The ridge became a shared home. Eco was celebrated as a hero. Children played with him, neighbors brought treats, and Pedro even made him a collar in the colors of the flag. Miguel laughed quietly, scratching his companion's head. "If it weren't for you, partner, this would still just be old paper." Echo wagged his tail, as if he understood every word. On a Sunday afternoon, Zuleika summed it up for everyone. What they built here isn't just a water wheel. It's a wheel of people, courage, and future. Months later, Miguel received an unexpected visit. His own distant family. Brothers and sisters who had turned their backs when he'd lost everything came, curious about the stories of the bus on the ridge that made electricity and hope. When they arrived, they were stunned. The bus was freshly painted, the wheel turning strong. The community gathered around a place reborn. "Miguel, you did all this?" his older sister asked, incredulous. He smiled softly, pointing to Eco lying in the sun, always watching. "We did. Me, him, and everyone who believed." The wheel kept spinning, singing its song of water and iron. The rusted bus, once a shelter of despair, had become a beacon, and Eco, the shepherd with mismatched eyes, stood faithful, reminding all that sometimes salvation comes from the most unlikely places, from a broken man, from a loyal dog, from a dream buried in the earth. And there, on that ridge, whenever the wheel sang, even the ghosts of the past finally learned how to rest.